Deaven and Heather Gay from MediaBarn. They're going to talk about putting your idea to the test. A few things before we get started. If you could silence your cell phones. And if you have a question, you can either raise your hand at the end of the session, or you can tweet your question using hashtag IST Startup, or you can text it to Pull Everywhere at 37607, type in IST Startup, then a space, and then your question. If you're asking a question, can you press and hold the little black button next to your computer so people can hear it over the live stream? That would be great. All right, so Keith is a 1990 graduate of the College of Liberal Arts at Penn State with a degree in Labor and Industrial Relations. And Heather has a Bachelor of Arts in International Relations with a minor in Psychology from the George Washington University, with an emphasis in marketing from the University of San Francisco. And without further ado, MediaBarn.
Thank you. So I just want to start by thanking everybody for coming out. This is our second session. We were here yesterday. And I just wanted to thank the faculty and staff of IST and also the students. This has been just a tremendous experience as a presenter. I think everything that's going on during Startup Week is awesome, and the behind-the-scenes work that they did to make our job easier was just fantastic. So thank you guys for really doing a great job. So a little bit about ourselves. We'll just do some brief introductions on us individually. As was mentioned, I'm a 90 grad. I graduated from the College of Liberal Arts with a degree in Labor and Industrial Relations. Had IST existed at the time when I was here, I would have gone had they accepted me, which I'm not sure they would have. Liberal arts was much easier to get into. So after graduating school, I took a job as an insurance adjuster, which had nothing to do with my degree because I just couldn't find anything in human resources. And after about a year of doing that, a few friends and I that I met up here went down to Washington, D.C. and formed a rock band. And we played music for about 4 years professionally, just playing around the eastern seaboard. One afternoon, our guitar player hurt his hand, and we had to get jobs, which was a nightmare. I got a temp job at a little company called America Online, which was a small company based in Vienna. And then over the next 10 years, I worked at AOL. As it went through its crazy growth period, merger with Time Warner, all that other kind of stuff. And while I was there, I ended up running the project management team for the entire creative studio. So we were responsible for designing and developing everything that went on the AOL service. We also were responsible for migrating it from a proprietary system onto the burgeoning World Wide Web and HTML that we're so familiar with today. So I kind of cut my teeth there. In 2004, I decided to leave with a friend of mine and start MediaBarn as a services company. And since then, that's what I've been doing. So that's just a little bit about how I got to where I am. I'll let Heather talk about her.
I'm Heather Gay. I've been with MediaBarn as the Director of Research for about 4 years now. And before that, well, I guess I'm going to sort of start at the beginning, as Keith did. When I finished graduate school in the early 1990s, I went to work for a syndicated research supplier that produces sort of large industry reports, specific reports, in specifically the high-tech area, super high-tech, things like telephone switching and things along those lines. I stuck that out for about 2 years, but that was kind of boring work. And then I wound up working for a high-tech company in Silicon Valley called The Learning Company that makes educational software for children. And one of the things that I found that was really fascinating in the 5 years that I was there was how rapidly the technology changed. And I'm sure that you've seen this even in the short span of time that you've been in school and a little earlier in your lifetimes, how the technology can change so quickly, and yet the skills that you've got, you can transfer from one thing to the other. So at the time, in the 90s, I was doing a lot of packaging research and trying to understand how people made decisions about the things that they purchase. And now I've sort of transferred that into more usability testing and the way that things work on the internet and on mobile devices. But it's sort of a lot of the same thing. It's just that instead of being on a package on a shelf, we're looking instead at things digitally. So I love what I do, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we talk a little bit, but I think we can probably go on to MediaBarn.
Great. So just real quickly about the company itself. As I mentioned, we were established in 2004, and we run 3 primary lines of business. We have a creative design and production studio, and that's your typical creative agency. So our clients come to us on that side of the business for complete design and production projects, websites, mobile apps, those kinds of things. We have a placement services line of business, and in that line, that's essentially a temp agency. So what we do is we staff people in the internet skill sets. So we staff visual designers, we staff project managers, HTML developers. And when I say staff, I mean our clients in that world call us up and say, hey, we need a visual designer for 6 months. They're going to come live with us. So it's really staff augmentation or temp agency, as you guys may know it. And then what we're here to talk about today is our research services. We run a usability lab, a user experience lab, and in that is where we do our user experience testing as well as focus group testing. And that's what we're really going to talk about today. We're down in Virginia, and we've hosted a couple tours already. So if anybody's interested in coming down, or if you're ever down in the DC area, definitely hit us up. We'd love to just spend some time with you and talk to you and show you the place. So we're going to talk about what we're really here to talk about, the basics of user research. And I'm going to let Heather talk about this side.
So when we think about user research, I sort of differentiate that from market research, which is, again, sort of where I'd come from initially in my background. Market research I think of as being looking at the market as a whole. Who are the people that are going to be purchasing or using your product? What are their demographics? What sorts of things do they like or not like? User research is focused a little bit more on how your product or service is actually used. And as Keith was mentioning, that's sort of where the majority of our focus from research is. And so that's basically what we're going to be talking about today is more user research as opposed to just a broad marketing research.
That's right. And we're talking about a lot of things here. We're going to talk about focus groups. We're going to talk about usability studies. We could easily take an hour, 2-3 hours and talk about each one of those. So this is really meant to be a brief overview just to give you all a sense of what it means to do this type of market research out in the real world. And I was talking with some folks yesterday. This is also very differentiated from academic research. These are very short time frame. This is look at some designs, figure out what's wrong with them, and close it up. There's no protracted research that has to be done to figure out the hows and whys or anything like that. This is when we say research, this is really a very condensed form of research. This isn't ongoing, long-term research trying to figure out some, long-standing psychological problem. These are 2-day things. So the types of research that we conduct, Heather can chat about those.
Sure. So when I think of research, I think of sort of two main camps. There's quantitative research and qualitative research. And as academic research often is, I would think that generally falls more into the quantitative realm. You're looking at large sample sizes of people, numbers that you can run statistical analyses on, at things like surveys, political polls, things of that nature sort of fall under that camp. The majority of the work that we do falls into the qualitative realm, which I think of as being better. I enjoy it more. I think that it's pretty easy to get numbers. You can manipulate them pretty much any way that you want to. But when somebody gives you a facial expression that they are frustrated, they're confused, they don't understand what they're doing, that's worth 1,000 or 1,000,000 of those numbers, in my opinion. So that's really what we focus on in the focus groups and the usability testing. We'll talk a little bit more, but just to differentiate between the focus groups and the usability, focus groups are oftentimes more for understanding the perceptions and the reasons why people do different things. So you may conduct a focus group with a small group of people, and we're going to do that demonstration today so you can sort of see how that works, to have them discuss among themselves their feelings and the reasoning behind certain decisions that they make. It could be about making a purchase. It could be about using an app. It could be about just about anything, the flavor of ice cream that they like to have, anything at all. And those are done usually at an early stage of a product's development, or if executives are trying to just get a better feel or like take a pulse check of who their customers are and what they're feeling. Usability testing, typically we do in a one-on-one session. So it'll just be a moderator and a user or a respondent, and the respondent is given a series of tasks to complete by using the product, the app, the service, the website, whatever it is that we're testing, and then we observe and ask them about how they're able to use something. And through these series of tasks, we can determine whether or not there are any issues and uncover those that way.
Great. So we'll talk a little bit about why to conduct it. It's fairly intuitive and fairly easy to understand that if somebody can't use your product, then it's not going to work. But yeah, it's one of the things that constantly gets overlooked. So a few of these things we're going to talk about seem pretty obvious, but they seem to go by the wayside more often than not. So the first is to increase adoption. If you create an app that you know how many apps there are right now, over 500,000, 600,000 apps. If you have someone download it, and within the first few seconds they can't figure out how to register, they can't figure out what it's for or how to use it, you're done. That's it. So it's as simple as that. I mean, if you can't have people use it or need it, if they don't want it, they're not going to adopt it either. So the focus group is to help figure out, do the people actually want it? Is there a market for it? And then two, can they use it? And when they do download it, are they going to pay you the $1.99 for it, or 99 cents, or even better, use it for a long time and build your critical mass so that you can monetize it in another way. So increasing adoption seems like a very obvious one, but a lot of times people just don't think at that basic level. Manage costs. Again, in focus groups, if you find that you have a feature set of 20 features that you want to put into your app, and after doing some market research, you find that people really only care about 4 of them. If you do that market research up front and don't spend the development dollars to develop those other 16 features, you've just saved yourself a boatload of money. And when you're launching an app, that's huge. I mean, it's really important. So don't develop the features people don't want. And if you do develop them, make sure you usability test them. An app with 20 features in it is going to have a complicated user interface. You better make sure people can use it for what you need them to use it for, and more importantly, what they need to use it for. So you definitely want to use research to manage your development costs and not overdevelop your application. And then lastly is really to validate your assumptions. In theory, you created your app because you have assumed that there is a market for what you're doing. You validate that, then you validate how you've executed it and what your plan is, and you use testing to validate everything once you've gone through it all. So I included a couple quotes from some of our folks. These first 2 quotes are from clients of ours. Vicki Doran, she's the Vice President of Brand and Digital Media for the Better Business Bureau, and she wholeheartedly believes in usability testing and in focus group testing. So she says here it's an essential step in our development process, and that has been true for them for a long time. K-12, Ginny Rice is their VP of User Experience, and they test things religiously. They're homeschooling software for K through 12 kids, so they have an enormous investment in their proprietary tool and making sure that it gets adopted and used, and it's easy for not only the students to learn on, but for the parents to understand what the kids are doing. They run the gamut in terms of usability issues, and they test religiously. And then someone you're all familiar with, Steve Jobs. As you may or may not know, Apple really does not put a whole lot of credence into testing, and they believe, and Steve Jobs believed, that the market doesn't know what it wants until you give it to them. And there is the entrepreneurial part of me that absolutely believes that, and I don't think that innovation should ever be driven by testing. However, I'm not Steve Jobs, and most people aren't. I think he was a tremendous visionary, and he was able to create a massive company built on a lot of great products, and they didn't do a lot of testing. But I would submit that they are the exception to that rule. A few other companies have certainly succeeded, but for the most part, market testing is an important part of what you do. And if anyone believes they're Steve Jobs and can pull off what Steve Jobs did, absolutely, by all means, go for it. But my point here is most people aren't Steve Jobs. Most people need to put their product through some sort of testing just to validate what they're doing. And I do subscribe to don't innovate through testing. I do believe in what he said there is if you have an idea and the market hasn't seen it yet and the market doesn't react to it properly the first time, you should never give up on that. I mean, the innovation and pushing the market is something only you can do. And tests can help validate it or not, but if you believe in it, figure out why it didn't test right and correct it. So we have an example here. So what we're going to try and show you guys today is how a usability test works and then how a focus group works. We're going to show you a usability test via a video. This is a video that all of our clients get. What you're looking at is the screen that the test participant was looking at. This is the product that we're actually usability testing. Down here is a picture-in-picture window of the test participant themselves. We have a camera set up watching their facial expressions as they use it. When we start the video, you'll be able to hear them. You'll be able to see their mouse movements and understand what they're trying to do. He's trying to execute a search on a new Social Security tool that AARP is putting out. So we'll just take a quick watch of this.
And I've gotten to that point where I'm thinking maybe it'll be worthwhile to get the 40 credits. At this time, connects temps from a pre-populated list. Okay. All right, I'm a little put off by that. Okay. At this time, the Social Security Q&A tool can accept terms from a pre-populated list only.
Okay. So right here, we already see obvious problems, right? You have the user saying he's put off by it. He's having to reread a dialogue that's been thrown up that he has to get through. It's a modal window that he has to read and click OK. So he's already, as he said, put off by this experience.
So what is that? I'm not sure what that means. I have to think about that.
Last thing you want your users to ever have to say. I have to think about that.
Enter the first letter of a keyword related to your inquiry into the search field and choose from the list that appears. Okay.
So what would you do next?
I tell you what I'd probably do. Well, what I am doing. Okay. I'd probably stop using the tool.
Okay, so you probably leave at this point?
There you go. He did exactly what it asked him to do. He went back. He was able to take his search term out enough that the pre-populated list came up. For whatever reason, the way that they were engineering this tool, search terms only could come from a pre-populated list that was dynamically generated as you started to type into the input field. For whatever reason, that decision was made, and we don't need to get into why. But he did what it asked him to do, and he still got the error. And at that point, he stopped using the tool. Going back to the adoption message earlier, you just lost that user. And in this test, that was a very standard thing that happened. So that's a real live example of how your adoption would just go right off the cliff if people were using this. This was the first page they came to. And if they were going to do that, that would be it for that tool. When to use each one of these. Heather, do you want to talk through this?
Sure. So as I was mentioning, thinking about focus groups and usability testing, I've listed several points during your product life cycle during which you might use either one or both of these methods to get some information from your target audience. Certainly during initial concept, as Keith had mentioned, if you've got a great idea, run it by some people. It would be great to run it by people that are going to be potential users, so people who sort of fit the demographic profile of the people that you are aiming to please with your product. It could be something that's a formal focus group that you conduct in a research facility and have recruited respondents come in that you pay and talk with for 90 minutes. It could just be a group of people that, again, sort of meet the target market and just sort of show them your idea or even just talk about it and get some feedback so that you can sort of mold and shape the idea that you've come up with into something that's going to be marketable. As we talked about a little earlier, one of the things that you can do with research is to help you narrow your feature set. As Keith mentioned, and I would agree with, you don't want to have people, just random respondents say, oh, that'll never fly, and then your idea is dead before you even get it off the ground. By the same token, if you've come up with a gigantic pile of things that your product could do, but you've only got a limited budget or you want to get it out to market in a certain amount of time, you don't have forever to build this thing. You want to be able to sort of narrow down to the features that are going to be the most salient to the people that you are targeting. So they can help you do that. And you can do that, again, probably by using a focus group, because because you want to have sort of that group discussion about, oh, well, I would use it to do this, and someone else could say, well, I would use it to do that. They can sort of feed off of each other. You may even be able to come up with new ideas that way that you didn't think of or that your development team didn't think of. There are several times at which you can do usability testing, and one of the things that we like to advocate is to test early and to test often. If you can manage to do it from a time and a budgetary perspective, it would be great to be able to put your product in front of people at various stages during your development life cycle. And we can do usability testing at even the wireframe stage. Even if you've just got sort of rough, drawn-out concepts or an idea of what your web page or your app might look like, you can show it to someone and have them look at it and understand enough to say, this is where I think I would be able to find such and such. Even if they can't actually click on it and get to it, you'd have an idea of where they would expect content to be, how they would expect to navigate through something. When we were talking yesterday, I mentioned that one of the things that's interesting is people can use their imaginations pretty well when given the opportunity. We did a focus group on a mobile app about a year ago, and I simply had photos of what the app might look like up on the screen. But the interesting thing was that even during the group, people were moving their hands as though they would go like this or that to swipe to the next screen because they could imagine that that's what they would do, which is perfect. That's exactly what we wanted them to do so that we would know, okay, this is working. They have an expected behavior and it was designed well enough so that they could understand what they were doing. The same would work in terms of a pre-launch prototype. If you're able to test your wireframes, your sort of rough sketches, work out any kinks that you've got there before you've invested any actual coding or development time into this. Then you can develop your prototype that might be, sort of a rough thing. Some things might click, some things might not. It may not go very deep, but again, you've got something to sort of put in front of people so they can get a sort of a general idea of how they would navigate through your product. Certainly, it doesn't hurt to do research even after you've launched your product. So it's, again, as we talked about a moment ago, you oftentimes have a certain time frame or a certain budget or some other factors that are going to propel you to go to market even before things are perfect. If you wait until things are perfect, you'll never get anything done. So you're going to wind up putting something into the market that you know is going to have need some work done to it still. You can do some research then after you've launched your product to work out some of those kinks or to do some tweaking. And iteration is as sort of as I was speaking before. If you're sort of testing at various points along your life cycle, you're learning things each time. And with usability testing, you can do this with relatively small samples. One of the things that we get asked about oftentimes is when you're doing usability testing, how many people do you need to talk to in order to get the answers that you need? And there's a group called the Nielsen-Norman Group that you may have heard of out in California. Jacob Nielsen is one of their founders. They have done quantitative studies on qualitative research so that they can tell you by talking to about 5 to 6 people, you can uncover 80% of your usability issues. If you talk to more people, you may uncover more issues, but you'll get the vast majority of them by talking to a relatively small sample of people. And I've seen this over and over and over again. At MediaBarn, we typically talk with between 8 and 12 people per study. And that's because most of our clients feel more comfortable. It's efficient for us to do that because our typical sessions last about 45 to 60 minutes apiece. So we can usually fit at least 6 to 8 interviews in a day when we run them back to back. And so if the client's going to come out and be with us for the day, it's efficient to just load up the schedule. We've got a whole day's worth of testing, sometimes 2 days worth of testing, and everybody feels as confident that we're seeing trends, we're seeing the same issues uncovered over and over and over again. We can usually get away with doing about half as much, though, if we wanted to, just to uncover the majority. But if you're doing this with some frequency, every 3 months, every 6 months, every year, depending on your timing and your budget, you're going to be able to uncover similar things. And the next time you go out, you'll be able to maybe dig a little bit deeper, focus on a different page, focus on a different feature, and have people do tasks along those lines.
Sure, that's great. And it's worth mentioning that that usability testing and focus group testing really are project management methodology agnostic. So if you're in a waterfall methodology, if you're using agile methodology, it really doesn't matter. It's just figuring out the appropriate time in your development cycle to figure out where to drop it in. So who's involved? Obviously the stakeholders. So anybody who's involved with the development of the product itself should be able to either view the testing or at least contribute to what is going to be tested. Moderator, we advocate for having someone other than yourself or someone close to the product do the actual moderation so that you can maintain a level of objectivity. Being a moderator is a skill set in and of itself, to be able to ask questions of people that are not leading, to make sure that you drill down on what's really important. That is a whole skill set, and if you are the developer of the product and you say, sure, you see this next button right here, right? You know, you're not really getting any much information out of it if you're actually leading the people right down where you want them to go. And then obviously the respondents, the people who are going to be taking the tests and actually participating in the tests themselves. You know, we like to have people who aren't overly familiar with the product simply because you don't want power users being your representative sample. So you really want people who are familiar with the product but not necessarily like Uber users. And if you are testing things that you are concerned about for your current constituents, you want them in your target market. If you're looking for to expand your market, you obviously want to pull people from that market to find out how your product and your message resonates with them. Where to test? So these are just a couple photos of our lab, because that's why we would show where to test. Just as you can see on the top right picture there, what we saw earlier when we were showing the video of the usability test, we would project the screen on this big monitor, and then on either of the small monitors is where we would project the cameras of the test participants. The observers would sit at that table, and then in the picture below could be a focus group room. That's typically where we would conduct a focus group. The folks would sit around that round table. We'd have a moderator sitting there with them. Behind the mirrored glass would be where our observers are, and it just creates a little bit more of an intimate setting, and it gives the ability to just foster communication in a more condensed environment. We're going to have a focus group here in a little bit, and hopefully these folks up front here can forget that you all are in the room and open up a little bit and give their opinions, because it's typically not conducted with a group of observers surrounding us like that. So the last, really the last video I want to show you, you know, we think about usability testing as an investment in your own idea. Just to give you a quick setup, this is a search results page that we've developed for our Better Business Bureau friends. It's not in market yet. We're still working on it. But they monetize this page in two places. They monetize it by selling sponsorships down the right rail, and they also monetize it by driving traffic through to accredited businesses in search results. So they are testing this best bets area, and to be honest with you, a few folks over there thought that this was so obvious that they didn't even test it. So during one of the usability tests for the results page in general, we threw a question in about can you find the best bets?
Did you notice this area earlier when we started looking at the list of businesses?
Not at all. When I, the first contact with this page, I went straight to the distance, the accreditation, and the names. Yeah.
So it was a very typical response. They weren't sure that they even needed to test this because it was so obvious. Almost none of the participants saw it. And we can hypothesize why. I mean, typically, this starts to suffer from a little bit of blindness because people believe this is an ad or it's a purchased search result. So they tend to glance right over it and go right down to whatever it is they believe are the legitimate results. We haven't validated that, but that's our assumption. But almost everybody in this test missed that. And if you're monetizing a page to the level that they are and relying on this, they would not have caught that had they not tested it. So we're right now working with them to figure out how better to show this so that people do pick it up and actually do click through on it. But it's a small example of a major problem that we caught doing 30 seconds worth of testing. So then just to recap, as Heather said earlier, you know, we advocate not just because it's our business, but because we believe in it. Test early and test often. And if you can't go to a usability testing facility, just read up on how you can do it yourself. Always get your products tested. If you do it right, you'll always learn something new. We have people that test with us on a very regular basis, and every single time they learn something new, and it actually kind of amazes me every now and then. Employ the type of research that's appropriate to your project. If you don't have the budget to do a full test, figure out another way to get it done. and innovate and don't exclusively rely on testing. Going back to the earlier conversation about jobs, this should never, ever take the place of your great idea. Just make sure that your great idea is executed properly and the market will adopt it. So that's it. We're going to take some questions quick, and then we're going to run this focus group. So do you all have any questions? Sure.
Look into using facial recognition